What if the thing you believe will finally make you feel safe, doesn't? In this real English story, I share my journey to the United States, struggling with English, love, money, and fear, and the surprising moment my first salary arrived. If you feel tired or ready to give up, this story is for you. Are you looking for safety? Have you ever sat in silence and quietly asked yourself, why am I still so tired even when I'm trying this hard? Maybe you clicked on this video for a familiar reason, you want to improve your English. But deep down, what you really want is something much simpler, to feel stable, to feel less anxious, to finally feel safe. I understand that feeling more than you might think. Because during my early days in the United States, I kept asking myself a question almost identical to this video's title. Did my first salary really give me peace? If you've been feeling discouraged while learning English, here is something important to know. Your brain is not lazy. According to research from the American Psychological Association, when people feel financially or emotionally unsafe, the brain's language processing ability actually becomes less efficient. In simple words, when you are worried all the time, English automatically feels harder. Not because you are bad at it. Your nervous system is just busy, trying to survive. I remember my first months in America very clearly. But before we go deeper, picture something familiar. You open an English listening video. You feel determined. You tell yourself, today I will practice seriously. But after a few minutes, your mind starts drifting. Bills, work, family, the future, everything shows up at once. And suddenly the English audio becomes background noise. If this has ever happened to you, congratulations, you are completely normal. My journey in the United States did not start in a glamorous way. It was nothing like the shiny version of the American dream you see in movies. It began with a slightly worn suitcase, a hopeful but nervous heart, and English skills, good enough to buy coffee but not good enough for deep conversations. And the funny thing is, back then I truly believed something very simple. Once I arrived in America, got a stable job, and received my first paycheck, everything would feel okay. Peace would come automatically. I believed that almost completely. But life in the US has a very interesting habit. It rarely hits you all at once. Instead, it slowly peels away your illusions, layer by layer. In the beginning, what shocked me was not just how fast people spoke English. It was the constant feeling that I had to figure everything out on my own. In many parts of the United States, the cost of living, insurance systems, taxes, they all follow a very clear logic. If you don't understand the system, you will always feel one step behind. And when you constantly feel behind, opening your mouth to speak English becomes twice as hard. There is a concept in psychology called cognitive load, the total amount of mental effort your brain is using at one time. When your mind is busy handling too many survival concerns, money, cultural adjustment, future uncertainty, the working memory available for language becomes smaller. This is exactly why many hardworking English learners freeze in real-life conversations. I know this because I lived it. I still remember one of my first winter nights in America. The cold was dry and sharp, very different from the humid cold I used to know. I stood by the window of my tiny rented room, looking out at a quiet parking lot under yellow lights, and one English sentence kept repeating in my head, "I hope I made the right choice." I really hoped I did. You see, my English learning journey was never just about grammar or vocabulary. It was always about something deeper, the search for safety. The quiet question of whether I could truly stand on my own in this new country. And maybe that is exactly why this video exists. Throughout my journey of living and working in the United States, I discovered something surprisingly counterintuitive. The people who improve fastest in English are not always the smartest ones. Most of the time, they are the ones who find enough emotional stability to risk sounding imperfect. To speak even when their sentences are not beautiful. To listen without panicking. Researchers at the University of California have found that the most effective language learning environments are what they call low-threat environments. In other words, when you feel safe, your brain learns faster. Sound familiar? We are already circling back to our original question. So in this video, I'm not just going to tell you about my first paycheck in America. I'm going to share the full journey, from the early culture and climate shocks, to an unexpected love story between two very different people, to marriage, family, children, and the quiet moment when I finally held my first paycheck in my hands and felt something very surprising inside my chest. Because sometimes, money pays the bills, but something else pays the fear. If you came here to practice English listening, reading, and speaking, you are absolutely in the right place. But if you are here because you are also searching for a small sense of peace in a very noisy life, then this story might reach deeper than you expect. Take a slow breath. We're about to go back to where everything truly began. The moment I decided to leave my home country and board a flight to the United States, carrying far more hope than experience. And trust me, that was when the real story began. The decision to leave home. Let me tell you something strange about big life decisions. They rarely feel big in the moment. They feel quiet, ordinary, almost suspiciously calm. The day I decided to move to the United States was not dramatic. No movie soundtrack. No slow-motion goodbye at the airport. Just me, sitting with my laptop open, staring at a confirmation email that would quietly rearrange my entire future. I remember whispering to myself in very simple English, "This is really happening." And even then, part of my brain did not fully believe it. If you've ever dreamed about starting over in another country, you probably imagine confidence, excitement, maybe even a little heroic energy. But real life is more complicated. According to migration psychology research published by Stanford University, most people who relocate internationally experience a mix of hope and low-grade fear at the same time. Your brain is literally holding two opposite emotions in one hand. That was exactly me. On the outside, I looked calm. I told friends and family I was ready. I practiced small English sentences every day. I watched American YouTube videos at 0.75 speed like my future depended on it, because honestly, it kind of did. But inside, a very quiet question kept repeating, what if I'm not ready for this? Here's something many people don't talk about. The hardest part of moving to the US is not the airplane ride. It's the psychological gap between the life you understand and the life you're about to enter. Before America, my world was predictable. I knew how the weather behaved. I understood the unspoken social rules. If someone spoke quickly, I could still catch the meaning. That invisible comfort zone? It is more powerful than most people realize. Neuroscientists call this predictive safety. Your brain feels calm when it can accurately predict what will happen next. Moving to the United States quietly destroys that prediction system. Suddenly, everything becomes slightly unfamiliar. The way strangers smile at you in public. The way cashiers ask, "How's your day going?" and actually expect a response. The way the air feels different depending on which state you land in. These sound like small things. They are not small when your nervous system is already working overtime. I still remember packing my suitcase the night before my flight. Not in a dramatic way. Just slow, careful folding. But every item I placed inside carried a silent question. Will I still be the same person when I open this bag in America? There is an interesting psychological phenomenon called identity shift under migration stress. Studies from the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology show that when people move to a new country, especially one with a different language, their sense of self temporarily becomes unstable. You are still you, but also not fully the old you anymore. That in-between space? It is uncomfortable. And no English textbook prepares you for it. At that time, my English was functional but fragile. I could handle simple conversations. I could say things like, "Nice to meet you," or "I'm looking for this address." But deeper emotional expression? That was still locked behind a wall of hesitation. And here is the irony. I was about to move to a country where communication speed is basically an Olympic sport. The morning of my departure arrived faster than my confidence did. Airports have a very specific emotional smell. If you've ever stood in an international terminal before a one-way flight, you know exactly what I mean. It is a mix of coffee, recycled air, quiet anxiety, and possibility. Lots of possibility. While waiting at the gate, I opened my phone and typed a short note to myself in English. Not perfect English. Just honest English, be brave. One step at a time. I did not realize it then, but that simple sentence would become one of the most important learning strategies I ever used. Because here is a small secret for anyone trying to improve their English in real life. Your brain remembers emotionally meaningful language much better than random vocabulary lists. Cognitive scientists call this emotion-tagged memory encoding. When words are connected to real feelings, fear, hope, love, retention increases dramatically. In other words, the English sentences you whisper to yourself during uncertain moments often stick longer than the ones you memorize from flashcards. When boarding finally began, my heart was not racing the way I expected. It was slower. Heavier. Like my body understood something my mind was still catching up to. As I walked down the narrow airplane aisle, I noticed something almost funny. Everyone else looked normal. Relaxed. Some people were already watching movies. Some were texting. And there I was, carrying what felt like an entire invisible future in my backpack. I found my seat, fastened the belt, and looked out the small oval window. The runway lights stretched into the distance like a quiet question mark. That was the exact moment the thought returned, soft but persistent. Will this move finally make me feel safe? I didn't know the answer yet. But the plane was already starting to move. The silent fear of English. Imagine standing in a crowded room where everyone is speaking, and your brain suddenly forgets how to swim. That was me during my first real week in the United States. Not the tourist version. Not the smile and take photos version. I'm talking about the ordinary, everyday moments, ordering food, answering small talk, understanding fast instructions, the places where real English lives and breathes. And here's the part nobody warned me about. The hardest moments were not when people spoke fast. The hardest moments were the quiet ones, when it was my turn to speak. You might know this feeling. Your mind has the words somewhere. You studied them. You practiced. You even understood the sentence in your head. But when your mouth opens, there is a 2-second delay that feels like 2 years. And in American conversation speed, 2 seconds is basically a lifetime. There is actually a scientific reason for this. Psycholinguists call it the speech production bottleneck. When you speak in a second language, your brain must complete several steps in milliseconds, retrieve vocabulary, apply grammar, organize word order, and coordinate mouth movement. Under stress, especially social stress, this system slows down dramatically. Translation: You're not broken. Your brain is buffering. My first week in America gave me plenty of buffering moments. One afternoon, I walked into a small grocery store near the apartment I had just rented. Nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights. Quiet music. The kind of normal place that should not feel intimidating. But my nervous system did not get the memo. At the checkout counter, the cashier smiled, friendly, fast, very American, and asked the classic question. How's your day going? Now, logically, I knew this question. I had heard it in videos. I had practiced answers. Easy, right? Except my brain decided to panic anyway. In my head, 3 possible answers appeared at the same time. I'm good. It's going well. Pretty good, thank you. And because my brain tried to choose all 3 at once, what came out of my mouth was a very awkward. I'm going good, thank you. The cashier was polite. She nodded. Life moved on. But inside my chest, something tightened. If you've ever experienced that tiny wave of embarrassment after speaking imperfect English, you know exactly what I mean. It's small on the outside, huge on the inside. Here's where psychology gets interesting. According to research from the University of Michigan's Language and Social Cognition Lab, language anxiety activates the same threat detection pathways in the brain as mild physical danger. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, does not fully distinguish between I might sound stupid and something might be wrong. Both trigger stress. So the next time your heart beats faster before speaking English, remember this: your nervous system is slightly overprotective, not overly dramatic. During those early weeks, I started noticing a pattern in myself. When I was alone, my English felt okay. I could read articles slowly. I could watch YouTube with subtitles. I could even repeat sentences out loud with decent confidence. But the moment a real human looked at me and expected a response, my fluency dropped by at least 40%. This is extremely common, by the way. It's called the performance gap in second language acquisition, the difference between what you know and what you can produce under social pressure. Studies published in Applied Psycholinguistics consistently show that emotional pressure can temporarily reduce spoken fluency even in intermediate learners. In other words, the version of your English inside your bedroom is often much stronger than the version that shows up at the coffee counter. Once I understood this intellectually, something inside me softened a little. I stopped interpreting every awkward sentence as personal failure. Instead, I started treating real-life conversations as what they actually were, live training sessions. Small shift. Big impact. I also began using a very simple strategy that later changed everything for me. After each slightly uncomfortable English interaction, I would quietly repeat the corrected sentence to myself. For example, after the grocery store moment, I stepped outside and softly said, "My day is going well." Slow. Clear. Calm. This technique is supported by something called immediate retrieval reinforcement. When you quickly restate the correct form after a real emotional moment, the brain strengthens the neural pathway much faster than passive review. Basically, your mistakes become premium learning material. And honestly, America gave me plenty of premium material. But even as my listening improved and my small talk became smoother, one deeper fear still followed me around like background noise. It wasn't just about sounding wrong. It was the quiet worry underneath. If I can't fully express myself in English, will I ever truly belong here? That question stayed with me longer than I expected. Because language, I was beginning to realize, is never just about words. It's about identity, connection, safety. And at that point in my journey, I was still searching for all three. The unexpected meeting. Funny thing about life in America, the moments that change you rarely send a calendar invitation first. By the time this happened, I was still in that fragile stage of adjustment. My English was improving slowly. My listening had become less painful. I could survive small talk without mentally rehearsing every word. But inside, I still carried that quiet background tension, the feeling of being slightly out of sync with the world around me. And then, on a completely ordinary afternoon, something very ordinary happened. Which, of course, turned out to be not ordinary at all. It was early spring in the United States. The kind of day when winter is technically over, but the air still has that cool hesitation. I had decided, very bravely, in my opinion, to practice real-life English outside my comfort zone. So I walked into a small public library near my neighborhood. Libraries in America have a very specific energy. Calm, but alive. Quiet, but full of invisible stories moving between the shelves. For language learners, it is actually one of the safest environments you can choose. Low noise, low pressure, and, according to environmental psychology research, spaces with predictable social rules help reduce cognitive stress during second language use. In simple terms, your brain relaxes more in places where people expect quiet behavior. I found a seat near the window, opened a beginner-friendly English book, and began reading slowly. Not perfectly. Not fluently. Just steadily. At that time, my strategy was simple: consistency over speed. About 20 minutes in, I heard a soft voice nearby. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Now, you would think after weeks in America, this kind of question would feel normal. But the human nervous system has a funny memory. Mine still reacted like this was a surprise pop quiz. I looked up. And that was the first time I saw her. Nothing dramatic happened in that exact second. No movie-style slow motion. No background music. Just a normal person holding a notebook, waiting politely for an answer. But sometimes the moments that look the most ordinary on the outside are the ones quietly rearranging your future. My brain quickly scanned the situation. Simple question. Simple answer. You've practiced this. I took a small breath and said, carefully, "No, it's free. Clear. Understandable. Not elegant, but functional." And at that stage of my life, functional English was a victory. She smiled, thanked me, and sat down. For the next few minutes, we both returned to our reading. Quiet. Peaceful. Exactly the kind of low-pressure environment language experts recommend. But then something interesting happened. She noticed the book I was reading. "You're studying English?" she asked gently. Now here is where many language learners experience what psychologists call the identity exposure moment, the point when your learner status becomes visible to another person. For many people, this creates a spike in self-consciousness. I definitely felt it. But something about her tone was calm. Curious, not judgmental. And that subtle difference matters more than most people realize. Research in social threat perception shows that the brain is extremely sensitive to microsignals of judgment versus support. So instead of freezing, I nodded. Yes. I'm still learning. Slow. Honest. Real. What happened next surprised me. She didn't switch to fast, complicated English. She didn't correct me. She simply adjusted her speaking speed slightly and said, "You're doing great. Learning a new language is not easy." That single sentence did something unexpected inside my nervous system. It relaxed. There is solid neuroscience behind this, by the way. When learners receive supportive feedback during language use, the brain releases small amounts of dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in motivation and learning reinforcement. Encouragement, when genuine, literally makes your brain more willing to try again. We started talking in short, simple exchanges. Nothing deep at first. Where we lived. How long I had been in the U.S. What I found surprising about American life. I spoke slowly. Sometimes I paused to search for words. But something important was different this time. I wasn't panicking. Because for the first time since arriving in America, I felt something subtle but powerful. I felt safe enough to be imperfect. And if you are learning English right now, listen carefully to this part. Fluency does not begin when your vocabulary becomes perfect. Fluency begins the moment your nervous system stops treating conversation like danger. Looking back now, that quiet afternoon in the library was not just a random conversation. It was the first crack in the wall of tension I had been carrying since I arrived in the United States. Of course, I didn't know then how important that meeting would become. I didn't know this calm stranger would slowly become one of the most important people in my American journey. I didn't know a simple question about an empty chair would eventually connect to love, family, responsibility, and even the meaning of my first paycheck. At that moment, all I knew was this. For the first time in weeks, speaking English didn't feel like survival. It felt like connection. And that changed everything more than I expected. Love between differences. Love sounds romantic in theory. In real life, especially in a new country, it feels more like two operating systems trying to update at the same time. After that quiet afternoon in the library, our conversations became more frequent. At first, they were simple. Coffee after reading. Short walks. Light jokes about how confusing American grocery stores can be when you don't recognize half the brands. Nothing dramatic. Just steady, human connection. But here's what made it different. She grew up in the United States. I did not. And cultural differences are funny. They don't usually explode in big arguments. They show up in small, everyday expectations. For example, in my culture, silence during a meal can feel comfortable, peaceful. In hers, silence sometimes meant something was wrong. So one evening at a small diner, while I was quietly enjoying my food, she suddenly asked, "Are you okay?" I looked up, confused. "Yes." "Why? You're so quiet." That was the first time I realized something important. Communication is not just language. It's interpretation. According to research from the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology, couples from different cultural backgrounds often experience what's called micro-misalignment, small misunderstandings caused by different social norms rather than personal flaws. If not addressed, these tiny misinterpretations slowly create emotional distance. But if handled with curiosity instead of defensiveness, they become bridges. So instead of feeling criticized, I tried something new. I explained. In my family, I said slowly, choosing my English words carefully, quiet means comfortable. She paused. Then smiled. In my family, quiet sometimes means upset. And just like that, a potential misunderstanding became a moment of learning. This became our pattern. When I spoke too directly, she would gently tell me how it sounded in American culture. When she expressed feelings very openly, I would take a second to process instead of assuming conflict. We were not just building a relationship. We were building a shared language. There's a concept in relationship psychology called cultural empathy adaptation. Studies from UCLA Family Research Center show that couples who actively discuss cultural differences instead of ignoring them have significantly higher long-term relationship satisfaction. Why? Because transparency reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the biggest triggers of emotional insecurity. And insecurity, as I was slowly learning, was the opposite of safety. As our relationship deepened, another layer of difference appeared: financial expectations. In the United States, conversations about money are often more direct than in many other cultures. Budgeting, credit scores, insurance, taxes, these are normal topics in serious relationships. For me, money had always been something practical but slightly uncomfortable to discuss. One evening, she asked gently, "What does financial security mean to you?" That question hit deeper than she probably intended. Because for me, moving to America had always been connected to one quiet belief: if I earn enough, I will finally feel safe. Money was not just money. It was stability. Proof. Protection. But love complicates simple formulas. As we started planning a future together, I realized something surprising. My stress about earning more was not only about survival anymore. It was also about responsibility. About wanting to provide. About wanting to prove to myself that I belonged here. There's a fascinating psychological theory called attachment security and financial perception, explored in studies by the American Psychological Association. It suggests that people with insecure environmental transitions, like immigration, often attach exaggerated emotional meaning to financial milestones. The first job. The first paycheck. The first savings account. That was me. Meanwhile, she viewed safety differently. Yes, money mattered. But emotional reliability mattered more. Consistency. Communication. Showing up. One night, during a long conversation about our future, she said something simple. "I don't need you to be rich. I need you to be steady." Steady. That word stayed with me. Because up until then, I had been chasing an image of success. But she was describing something quieter. Less dramatic. More sustainable. And here's the part one didn't expect. Loving someone in a second language forces you to become emotionally precise. You cannot hide behind complicated vocabulary. You must choose clear words. I feel nervous. I feel hopeful. I'm scared I'm not enough. I want to build something stable with you. Short sentences. Real meaning. Language experts often say that emotional vocabulary is one of the most powerful accelerators in second language fluency. Why? Because emotions increase retention and authenticity. When you speak from lived experience, your brain stops translating and starts expressing. Without realizing it, love was improving my English. But more importantly, it was reshaping my definition of safety. Safety was no longer just about salary numbers or job titles. It was about whether two people could sit across from each other, from different climates, cultures, and childhoods, and still choose understanding over ego. Did we argue? Of course. Did misunderstandings happen? Absolutely. But each time, instead of asking, who is right, we slowly learned to ask, what are we missing about each other's perspective? And that question changes everything. Because when two people from different worlds decide to build one shared future, safety stops being a destination. It becomes a practice. And I was only beginning to understand what that truly meant. When money became pressure. Nobody tells you this part of the American journey clearly enough. The bills don't arrive dramatically. They arrive quietly, and then they keep arriving. By the time our relationship had grown more serious, my life in the United States had started to look stable from the outside. My English was smoother. I understood daily conversations without mentally translating every word. I knew how to navigate the grocery store without feeling like I was decoding a puzzle. But financially? That was a different story. If you've ever lived in the U.S., you already know this rhythm. Rent. Utilities. Health insurance. Car insurance. Phone plan. Taxes. Everything has a system. And the system runs on one simple assumption: you understand how it works. At that stage, I understood just enough to function. Not enough to feel fully in control. And when control feels uncertain, the human brain does something very predictable. It increases background stress. According to research from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, financial uncertainty is one of the strongest predictors of chronic low-level anxiety in working adults in the United States. Not dramatic panic, but persistent mental pressure that quietly drains cognitive energy over time. That was exactly what started happening to me. During the day, I was fine. Productive. Focused. I practiced English. I worked on improving my communication. I showed up. But late at night, my brain started running spreadsheets I never opened. How much is rent next month? What if an emergency happens? Am I really building stability, or just surviving month to month? If you are learning English while also managing real-life financial pressure, listen carefully to this part. Your difficulty focusing is not always about discipline. Sometimes, your nervous system is simply overloaded. There is a concept in behavioral economics called scarcity mindset, studied extensively by researchers at Princeton University. When people feel financial scarcity, even moderate, temporary scarcity, their mental bandwidth shrinks. Decision-making slows. Learning efficiency drops. Working memory becomes less flexible. In simple terms, when money stress goes up, language learning capacity often goes down. This explained something that had been quietly frustrating me. Some weeks, my English practice felt smooth. Other weeks, especially when bills stacked up, my focus felt scattered. At first, I blamed motivation. Later, I realized it was cognitive load. Life in America was teaching me two subjects at the same time: financial literacy and emotional regulation. And both were harder than grammar. Around this time, conversations between us, me and the person who had quietly become my emotional anchor, started including more practical topics. Budget planning, work schedules, long-term goals. Not in a stressful way. In a realistic way. One evening, we sat at the small kitchen table in my apartment, papers spread out between us. Numbers. Monthly estimates. Nothing dramatic. Just adulthood in its natural habitat. I remember staring at the total expenses and feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. Not panic. Just pressure. She noticed immediately. "You okay?" she asked gently. I exhaled slowly. Just thinking. And here is where something important shifted in my mindset. Before coming to the United States, I had unconsciously believed that financial pressure was a personal failure. That if I worked hard enough, worried enough, pushed enough, the stress would disappear. But research from the American Institute of Stress shows something very different. Moderate financial pressure is actually a normal phase during major life transitions, especially immigration and early career building. The key predictor of long-term stability is not the absence of pressure, but how people regulate their response to it. That distinction changed everything for me. Instead of interpreting every tight month as proof that I was falling behind, I began to treat it as data. Feedback. Information about where I needed to adjust. Small changes started happening. I tracked expenses more clearly. I asked more questions instead of guessing. I practiced real-world English phrases related to money and work, because in America, those conversations matter. Phrases like, "I'd like to review my bill. Can you explain this charge? I'm comparing insurance options." Functional language. Survival language. Confidence-building language. And something interesting happened as my financial understanding improved. My spoken English became more natural in practical situations. Because confidence is very domain-specific. When you understand the system, your brain relaxes. When your brain relaxes, your speech flows more smoothly. It's all connected, far more than most textbooks admit. But even as things slowly stabilized, one quiet question kept returning. The same question that had followed me since the beginning of this journey. If I finally earn enough, will the pressure actually disappear? At that point, I still believed the answer might be yes. I just didn't know yet how complicated that answer was about to become. Because very soon, I would experience something I had been working towards since the day I arrived in the United States. My first real paycheck. And what I felt in that moment surprised me more than any bill ever had. My first job in America. There is a special kind of humility that comes with your first job in a new country. Not the dramatic, movie-style humility, the quiet, everyday kind that shows up when you realize your degree, your past experience, and your confidence don't automatically translate across borders. By the time I seriously began job hunting in the United States, I had already improved my English enough to survive daily conversations. I could handle small talk. I could understand most instructions if people spoke at a normal speed. On paper, I looked ready. In reality, my nervous system still treated job applications like high-stakes missions. If you have ever searched for work in the U.S., you know the process itself is a language exam disguised as employment. Resumes must be structured a certain way. Cover letters need the right tone. Interviews move quickly. And perhaps most challenging of all, American workplace communication tends to be direct but friendly, confident but not arrogant perceived. It's a delicate balance. According to hiring research from LinkedIn Workforce Insights, communication clarity and perceived confidence are among the top factors U.S. employers evaluate during early interviews, sometimes even more than technical skill for entry to mid-level roles. That statistic lived quietly in the back of my mind every time I clicked Submit Application. My routine became almost ritualistic. Morning, check job boards. Afternoon, adjust resume wording. Evening, practice interview English out loud. Not perfectly. Just consistently. There is strong cognitive science behind this approach. Studies in applied linguistics show that spaced verbal rehearsal, speaking answers out loud over multiple days, significantly improves real-time fluency under pressure compared to silent review. Your mouth needs practice almost as much as your brain does. So I practiced. Questions like, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? Why do you want to work here? At first, my answers sounded robotic. Careful. Slightly over-rehearsed. But over time, something important started to happen. My rhythm improved. Not perfect fluency, but functional flow. Eventually, after more applications than I care to count, I received an email that made my heart pause for half a second. Interview invitation. Now here is the funny part about interviews in a second language. The fear is rarely about not knowing the answer. It's about not delivering the answer smoothly enough. The morning of the interview, my body was calm but alert. Like my nervous system had finally learned the difference between danger and challenge. That distinction matters. Psychologists call this stress reappraisal, when your brain begins interpreting pressure as performance energy instead of threat. Research from Stanford Performance Lab shows that people who make this mental shift perform significantly better in high-stakes conversations. I didn't know the term back then, but I was starting to live it. The interview itself was surprisingly human. Not an interrogation. Not a rapid-fire test. Just a conversation with structure. The hiring manager spoke clearly. Not slowly, but not aggressively fast either. I focused on one simple strategy that had been working for me. Listen fully. Pause briefly. Answer clearly. Not fancy. Effective. There were moments when I searched for words. Moments when my sentence structure was not elegant. But something important was different compared to my early weeks in America. I did not freeze. And that alone was progress. Near the end of the conversation, the interviewer asked the question that always carries more emotional weight than expected. Do you have any questions for us? Early in my journey, that question used to terrify me. It felt like an advanced English trap. But by then, I had prepared one simple, honest question. What does success look like in this role after 6 months? Clear. Professional. Easy to deliver. She nodded with interest, and in that moment, I felt something subtle but powerful shift inside me. Not full confidence, but growing steadiness. A few days later, the email arrived. Offer extended. I read it once. Then again. Then one more time just to make sure my brain wasn't adding imaginary words. I had officially secured my first real job in the United States. And here's what surprised me most. The biggest emotion was not excitement. It was relief. Deep, quiet relief. Because for many immigrants, and many English learners building a life in America, that first job represents something larger than employment. It represents traction. Proof that your communication is working well enough. Proof that you can function inside the system. Behavioral economists sometimes call this moment the stability threshold, the point where uncertainty begins to decrease in a measurable way. I could feel myself approaching that threshold. But there was still one milestone ahead. One moment I had been subconsciously building toward since the day I packed that slightly worn suitcase. My first paycheck. And I still believed, very sincerely at that point, that when that number finally appeared in my bank account, something inside me would fully relax. I wasn't wrong. But I also wasn't completely right. Because what I was about to feel was far more complicated than simple relief. The day my first paycheck arrived. The email notification came on a very normal morning. No dramatic music. No slow motion moment. Just a quiet vibration on my phone while I was halfway through my coffee. Payroll processed. For a second, I just stared at the screen. If you have ever worked towards something for months, maybe years, you know this strange psychological pause. Your brain doesn't celebrate immediately. It double-checks reality first. I opened my banking app slowly. And there it was. My first real paycheck in the United States. Now, if we follow the story I had been telling myself since the day I left home, this was supposed to be the moment. The moment everything inside me finally relaxed. The moment the background stress disappeared. The moment I could breathe differently. After all, hadn't I believed for so long that financial stability equals emotional safety? But something unexpected happened. Yes, I felt relief. Real relief. My shoulders dropped about half an inch. My breathing slowed. The constant low-level math running in the back of my mind finally quieted for a moment. But complete peace? Not exactly. And that realization surprised me more than the number in my account. There is actually strong psychological research that explains this moment. Behavioral scientists call it the arrival fallacy, the mistaken belief that reaching a specific external milestone will permanently change your emotional baseline. Studies from the Harvard Business School Well-Being Lab show that while income increases do improve short-term financial stress, the human nervous system adapts quickly. Within weeks or months, baseline emotional patterns often return unless deeper sources of security are addressed. In simple terms, money can reduce pressure, but it rarely eliminates uncertainty completely. Standing there in my small apartment kitchen, phone still in my hand, I felt this truth in real time. Was the paycheck important? Absolutely. Did it matter for rent, bills, and long-term planning? Without question. But the quiet voice inside me, the one that had been asking what makes you feel safe, since the beginning of this journey, was still awake. Later that evening, I shared the news. I got paid today, I said, trying to sound casual but probably failing slightly. She smiled immediately. Warm. Proud in that calm way she had. That's a big milestone, she said. And she was right. In American working culture, the first paycheck carries symbolic weight. It represents entry into the system, participation, contribution. It's not just money, it's confirmation that you are now moving with the rhythm of the place you chose to build a life. But then she asked me a question I didn't fully expect. Do you feel different? I paused. Because the honest answer required more nuance than I was prepared for. A little, I said slowly. But also not completely. She nodded, like she understood something I was still trying to articulate. Here is where neuroscience becomes very interesting. According to research from the National Institute of Mental Health, the human brain separates situational relief from core safety perception. Situational relief, like receiving income, reduces immediate stress signals. But core safety, the deeper nervous system calm, depends heavily on predictability, social connection, and perceived long-term stability. In other words, your bank account can improve faster than your nervous system updates. That was exactly what I was experiencing. Over the next few weeks, practical things did improve. I paid bills with less hesitation. I planned expenses more clearly. My financial anxiety dial turned down noticeably. But the deeper emotional calm? That was building more slowly. And something else interesting began to happen during this period. My English, especially in professional settings, became noticeably more fluid. Not magically perfect, but smoother, more automatic. There is a cognitive explanation for this too. When financial threat perception decreases, the brain reallocates mental bandwidth back toward higher-order functions like language processing and social communication. Researchers sometimes call this bandwidth recovery effect. Basically, when survival pressure goes down, fluency often goes up. I started noticing small wins everywhere. Phone calls felt less intimidating. Workplace conversations flowed more naturally. Even casual small talk in stores felt lighter. Confidence, it turns out, is highly interconnected across life domains. But despite all these improvements, one quiet realization kept settling deeper inside me. The paycheck gave me stability. But something else was giving me peace. And I was just beginning to understand the difference. Because very soon, life in America was about to shift again, not through money this time, but through something far more personal. Marriage. Family. Responsibility at a completely different level. And that would redefine safety in ways no bank balance ever could. A small family in a big country. If you really want to test your definition of safety, don't look at your bank account. Look at what happens when someone else depends on you. By the time marriage entered our story, life in the United States no longer felt foreign in the dramatic way it once had. I understood the system better. I had stable work. My English, while still imperfect, flowed naturally enough that I didn't rehearse every sentence in my head before speaking. From the outside, it looked like progress. From the inside, it felt like responsibility was quietly multiplying. Marriage, especially in America, changes the structure of daily life in subtle but powerful ways. It's not just romance. It's shared calendars, shared expenses, shared long-term decisions. In U.S. culture, partnership often operates like a team contract, transparent communication, equal input, practical planning. And then, eventually, came the conversation about children. There's something almost surreal about realizing that you are about to become someone's primary sense of safety. I remember the first time we talked seriously about starting a family. We were sitting on the couch, late evening, city lights reflecting faintly through the window. "Do you feel ready?" she asked. That question landed heavier than any job interview ever had. Ready financially? Maybe. Ready emotionally? I wasn't sure. Ready in English? That sounds like a strange thing to consider, but yes, even that crossed my mind. Because raising a child in the United States means navigating schools, healthcare systems, parent-teacher meetings, insurance policies, all in English. Fast English. Confident English. According to research from the American Academy of Pediatrics, parental stress is highest during early family transitions, especially in immigrant households adjusting to new institutional systems. The uncertainty isn't just about parenting, it's about navigating unfamiliar bureaucracies. In other words, responsibility magnifies language pressure. But here is what surprised me. When our child was finally born, fear did not arrive the way I expected. Yes, there were sleepless nights. Yes, there were moments of doubt. But there was also something deeper, a quiet recalibration of what safety actually meant. Holding a newborn changes your internal priorities instantly. Suddenly, your first paycheck feels small in comparison. Not irrelevant, but incomplete. I began to understand something that psychology calls relational safety anchoring. Studies from the University of Chicago Family Research Center show that long-term emotional security is more strongly predicted by stable relational bonds than by income level alone, once basic needs are met. Translation: after survival needs are covered, human beings derive deeper calm from connection than from accumulation. And I felt that truth in the simplest moments. Rocking a baby at 3 a.m. in a dimly lit room. Listening to soft breathing in the quiet of the night. Realizing that my voice, imperfect English and all, was now someone's comfort signal. There's another fascinating neuroscience detail here. Infants regulate their nervous systems by synchronizing with caregivers' voices and rhythms. Researchers call this co-regulation. The tone matters more than perfect grammar. The steadiness matters more than vocabulary range. That realization changed something fundamental inside me. For years, I had worried about speaking flawless English in America. Now, I was speaking gently, consistently, imperfectly, and it was enough. More than enough. Family life in the U.S. also introduced a new cultural dynamic. Independence is highly valued here. Children are encouraged to express opinions early. Emotional conversations are often direct. At first, I found this fascinating, sometimes even intimidating. In my upbringing, certain topics were handled more quietly. Here, openness was encouraged. But instead of resisting it, I chose curiosity. How do you usually handle this? I would ask. Small question. Powerful impact. That question became one of the most important tools in my marriage and parenting. It reduced assumptions. It increased collaboration. And slowly, our small family began building its own culture, not entirely hers, not entirely mine, but something shared. Financial stability still mattered. Absolutely. I budgeted more carefully than ever. I planned further ahead. I worked with greater focus. But the emotional equation had shifted. Safety was no longer just about reducing fear. It was about creating predictability for someone else. Morning routines. Consistent presence. Keeping promises. Interestingly, as my identity shifted from individual immigrant to husband and parent, my English confidence grew in unexpected ways. Not because I studied more, but because I had less time to overthink. When your child needs something, you speak. When a teacher emails, you respond. When a doctor asks questions, you answer. There is no room for perfection paralysis. And in that forced practicality, fluency strengthens. Looking back now, I can see clearly. My first paycheck reduced financial tension. But building a family reshaped my nervous system entirely. Because real safety, the kind that stays, is not just about how much you earn. It's about who feels calm when they hear your voice. And that understanding would eventually bring me closer to answering the question that started this entire journey. What truly makes you feel safe? Learning English through my own story. Here's something no one told me when I first started learning English in the United States. The fastest way to sound natural is not to memorize more vocabulary. It's to tell the truth. By the time I had a stable job, a growing family, and a slightly calmer nervous system, my relationship with English had completely changed. In the beginning, English was a test. Then it became survival. Later, it became professional necessity. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. It became my story. If you're watching this to improve your English listening and speaking skills, I want you to notice something important. Everything I've shared so far, from stepping onto that airplane, to freezing at the grocery store, to holding my first paycheck, none of it required complicated vocabulary. It required clarity. Research in second language acquisition from TESOL International Association consistently shows that learners who practice narrative-based speaking, telling real personal stories in simple structures, develop fluency faster than those who focus only on isolated grammar drills. Why? Because stories organize language naturally. Beginning. Struggle. Turning point. Reflection. Your brain loves structure. When you tell your own story, your mind doesn't search randomly for words. It follows a path. I didn't realize I was doing this at first. It started accidentally. At work, colleagues would ask simple questions. So what brought you to the US? How was it adjusting? Instead of giving short, defensive answers, I began experimenting with slightly longer responses. I moved here for opportunity. At first, it was overwhelming. But slowly, I learned how things work. Short sentences. Clear ideas. Real meaning. The more I repeated these stories in different conversations, the smoother they became. Not rehearsed, refined. There is a powerful cognitive mechanism behind this called retrieval strengthening. When you recall and retell information multiple times in slightly different contexts, neural pathways become more efficient. Fluency increases not because your vocabulary expanded dramatically, but because your access speed improved. In other words, you don't always need new words. You need better access to the words you already have. I began intentionally practicing this. On my commute to work, I would quietly narrate parts of my journey to myself in English. Today I feel more stable than last year. When I first arrived, I was afraid to speak. My first paycheck reduced stress, but family gave me deeper peace. These were not textbook sentences. They were lived sentences. And something interesting happened. My pronunciation improved, because repetition improves muscle coordination in speech production. My confidence increased, because I was speaking about topics I understood deeply. My anxiety decreased, because authenticity reduces performance pressure. According to research published in the Modern Language Journal, emotional relevance significantly enhances speaking performance and long-term retention in adult learners. When the topic matters to you personally, cognitive resistance decreases. That explains why I struggled more with random scripted dialogues than with talking about my own life. It also explains something important about this entire YouTube journey. When you practice English by listening to real stories, especially slow, clear storytelling, your brain processes rhythm, structure, and emotional cues simultaneously. This strengthens listening comprehension beyond vocabulary memorization alone. That's why I chose this format. Not dramatic speeches. Not complicated idioms. Just real-life narrative. Real English. Real pacing. Because fluency is not about sounding impressive. It's about being understood. There's another practical strategy one want to share, something simple you can apply immediately. Record yourself telling a 3-minute version of your own story. Not perfectly. Just honestly. Why did you start learning English? What was your hardest moment? What are you building now? Then listen back. Not to judge, but to observe. Where did you hesitate? Which phrases felt natural? Which sentences sounded forced? This method activates what cognitive psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to analyze your own performance objectively. Studies from Cambridge Language Assessment show that learners who regularly self-monitor through audio recording improve spoken fluency significantly faster than those who rely only on passive input. In simple words, you become your own teacher. And that's when something powerful happens. English stops being something outside of you. It becomes a tool inside you. Looking back at my journey in America, I can now see clearly, I did not become more fluent because I chased perfection. I became more fluent because I stopped separating language from life. My job interviews improved when I understood my value. My conversations deepened when my relationships deepened. My confidence strengthened when my sense of belonging strengthened. Language followed identity. not the other way around. And that realization changed everything. Because if fluency grows alongside stability, then maybe the question isn't just whether my first salary gave me peace. Maybe the deeper question is, who did I become while earning it? And that question would soon lead me to a truth far simpler than I expected. When you feel not good enough. There is a quiet sentence many English learners never say out loud. Maybe I'm just not good enough for this. If that thought has ever crossed your mind, even briefly, I want you to know something important right away. You are not alone. By the time my life in the United States looked stable from the outside, steady job, improving English, growing family, there were still moments when that old whisper returned. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just subtle enough to sit in the background of my thoughts. Usually it appeared in very ordinary situations. A fast group conversation at work. A joke I understood 2 seconds too late. An email I reread 3 times before sending. Nothing catastrophic. But enough to trigger that familiar internal question. Am I still behind? Psychologists call this the competence illusion gap, the distance between your actual functional ability and your emotional perception of that ability. Research from the University of Pennsylvania Positive Psychology Center shows that high-effort learners, especially immigrants and second-language professionals, often underestimate their real-world competence even after measurable improvement. In simple terms, your skills may grow faster than your confidence updates. That was exactly my situation. Objectively, I was functioning well. My workplace communication was clear. My daily life in America ran smoothly. My listening comprehension had improved dramatically compared to my early weeks. But emotionally? Part of my brain was still running old software. And here is the tricky thing about the human nervous system. It updates slowly when safety has been uncertain for a long time. One afternoon at work, this pattern became very clear to me. We were in a team meeting. Casual but fast-paced. People were exchanging ideas quickly, the very normal rhythm of American workplace discussion. At one point, I had a useful suggestion. I knew it. I had the words. But for about 3 seconds, I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because a small voice asked, "What if it comes out wrong?" If you've ever experienced that micro-hesitation before speaking English, you know how powerful those 3 seconds can feel. Here's the neuroscience behind it. According to studies from the National Center for Biotechnology Information, NCBI, second language speakers often maintain elevated activity in the brain's error monitoring network, even after reaching functional fluency. This means your brain remains extra sensitive to potential mistakes, like an overprotective security system that hasn't learned to relax yet. The good news? This sensitivity decreases with repeated safe speaking experiences. In that meeting, I made a small decision that turned out to matter more than I expected. I spoke anyway. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. Just clearly enough. The room did not freeze. No one looked shocked. The conversation continued normally, exactly as it would have if a native speaker had said the same thing. And in that very ordinary moment, something important updated inside my brain. Nothing bad happened. It sounds simple. But for the nervous system, repeated neutral or positive speaking experiences are what gradually rewire language anxiety pathways. Researchers call this exposure-based confidence recalibration. Translation: confidence is not built by waiting to feel ready. It is built by collecting calm evidence that you are already capable. After that day, I started noticing how often English learners, including my past self, misinterpret temporary discomfort as permanent limitation. Feeling slow is not the same as being incapable. Needing an extra second is not the same as being unqualified. Speaking simply is not the same as speaking poorly. But the brain, especially under long-term adaptation stress, loves to blur those lines. So I began doing something very intentional. Every time I successfully handled a real-life English interaction, a phone call, a work discussion, a parent-teacher conversation, I mentally logged it as evidence. Not ego. Data. Behavioral psychologists sometimes call this evidence-based self-trust building. When you consciously record successful experiences, your brain updates its internal prediction model faster. Over time, hesitation decreases because the nervous system has proof of safety. And slowly, not overnight, that old sentence lost some of its power. Maybe I'm not good enough. Started turning into, maybe I'm still growing. If you are somewhere in the middle of your English journey right now, not a beginner, but not fully confident either, this is often the most psychologically uncomfortable phase. Researchers sometimes refer to it as the messy middle of skill acquisition. Progress is real, but perfection is still far away. And that gap can feel emotionally noisy. But here is what I want you to remember, and I say this not as a teacher, but as someone who has lived every awkward pause and every quiet doubt in a second language. You don't need to feel fully confident to function effectively. You only need enough stability to keep participating. Because fluency, belonging, and even that deeper sense of safety, they don't arrive all at once. They build quietly. Conversation by conversation. Decision by decision. And by this point in my journey, one truth was becoming clearer than ever. My first salary helped. My English improvement helped. My growing family helped. But the real shift in my sense of safety was coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere much simpler than I had expected when I first boarded that plane. And in the next chapter of this story, everything would finally come into focus. What really made me feel safe? If you stayed with me through this entire journey, from the airplane seat where I questioned everything, to the grocery store confusion, to my first paycheck, to rebuilding confidence in English, then you deserve an honest ending. Did my first salary give me peace? Yes. But not in the way I expected. When I first moved to the United States, I believed money would be the final answer. I thought financial stability would silence anxiety, fix my marriage stress, strengthen my identity, and erase the fear of being an immigrant starting over. That belief wasn't shallow. It was survival logic. According to research from the American Psychological Association, APA, financial uncertainty is one of the top stress triggers for immigrants and early-stage professionals adjusting to new systems. Income stability significantly reduces cortisol levels, the body's stress hormone. So yes, when my first salary arrived, my nervous system relaxed. Bills could be paid. Groceries were secure. Rent felt manageable. But peace? Peace turned out to be more layered. Because once the immediate financial fear quieted, other questions surfaced. Do I belong here? Am I building something meaningful? Is my marriage growing stronger, or just surviving? Who am I becoming in this new country? Money reduced pressure. But it didn't answer identity. That's when I started noticing something subtle. The moments when I felt safest were not necessarily payday moments. They were ordinary evenings at home. Cooking together. Laughing over small cultural misunderstandings. Planning goals that felt shared instead of individual. In psychology, there's a concept called attachment security. Research from Stanford University's Relationship Science Lab shows that long-term emotional safety comes less from external achievements and more from predictable relational support. In simple words, feeling safe is less about income and more about connection. Looking back, I can see clearly that my deepest peace began growing the day my partner and I stopped seeing America as a test to pass, and started seeing it as a life to build together. Our conversations changed. Instead of asking, "Are we doing well enough?" we started asking, "What kind of life do we want?" That shift may sound small, but cognitively, it's massive. When your brain shifts from survival mode to growth mode, different neural networks activate. According to neuroscience research from Harvard Center on the Developing Brain, chronic stress narrows focus to threat detection. But emotional stability expands cognitive flexibility, long-term planning, and creativity. And I felt that shift physically. My English improved more naturally, not because I forced it, but because I was no longer speaking from fear. My work performance strengthened, not because I chased approval, but because I understood my value. My marriage deepened, not because challenges disappeared, but because we learned how to handle them without panic. That's when I finally understood something I wish someone had told me earlier. Safety is not a single event. It's an accumulation. It's built from repeated proof that you can survive difficulty. Repeated proof that you can learn. Repeated proof that your relationship can bend without breaking. Repeated proof that you can exist imperfectly and still belong. If you are watching this because you feel tired, discouraged, or unsure whether your effort is worth it, I want you to hear this clearly. Your current struggle does not cancel your future stability. Research in growth mindset theory, pioneered by Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford, consistently shows that people who interpret difficulty as development, rather than deficiency, build resilience faster and sustain long-term success. When I stopped asking, "Why is this so hard?" and started asking, "What is this teaching me?" everything softened. Not instantly, but steadily. And here's the part that might surprise you. The question that shaped this entire video, what makes you feel safe, no longer has a single answer for me. It's not just money. It's not just English fluency. It's not even just marriage stability. It's alignment. When my actions match my values. When my effort matches my goals. When my relationship reflects partnership instead of pressure. When my English allows connection instead of isolation. That alignment creates peace. And peace feels like safety. If this story has helped your English listening practice, that makes me grateful. If it has helped your mindset, that makes it meaningful. But more than anything, I hope it reminds you of something simple. You don't have to wait until everything is perfect to feel stable. You build stability by staying present through imperfection. And maybe, just maybe, your first salary, your first confident conversation in English, or your first honest conversation in your marriage, won't be the finish line. They'll be the beginning of a deeper kind of peace. So now I'll leave you with the same question that guided my journey. What truly makes you feel safe? And are you building it, one small step at a time? If this real English story resonated with you, stay with this channel. Because every story here is not just about language. It's about becoming. And your journey is still unfolding. You made it to the end of this journey, and that already says something powerful about you. Because the people who keep listening, keep learning, and keep moving forward are the ones who quietly change their lives. My first salary didn't just give me money, it gave me a mirror. A mirror that asked, what truly makes you feel safe? If this real English story practice helped your listening, your mindset, or even your heart today, don't stop here. Your fluency, your confidence, and your peace are built one story at a time. Subscribe to the channel for more slow, clear English stories about real life in the United States. Like the video if one moment in this story felt familiar to you. Comment below, what makes you feel safe right now? I read every comment. Because the next story might be the one that changes everything for you. Stay curious. Stay patient. And keep going, your breakthrough English moment may be closer than you think.